Hello, and thanks for joining us today for the latest Analytical Cannabis webinar, Extraction E2E, Why Filtration is a Critical Step in Cannabis Oil Processing. I'm Jack Rudd, Editorial Director for Analytical Cannabis, and I'm here to moderate the event. I'm really pleased to have Connor Hutchison and Bruce Vanneman joining us today as your presenters. Connor is a member of Powell Corporation's Scientific and Laboratory Services organization and has been working with cannabis producers for the last 3 years. Leveraging a chemistry degree and a deep process knowledge of commercial food and beverage manufacturing, he has played an integral part in Powell Corporation's global entrance into the cannabis market. As an SLS associate, he consults customers on how to best integrate Powell solutions into specific processes. Connor has a passion for teaching customers how to assess and optimize current processes, focusing on minimizing operational expense and maximizing total filter life. As Vice President of Avelo International, Bruce is responsible for the development of technology and formulations, as well as standard operating procedures associated with botanical extraction and processing. Mr. Vanneman brings with him 15 years of knowledge and expertise in the cannabis industry. He has a very successful track record in the startup and expansion of multiple cannabis-related businesses, and is proficient in all aspects of the cannabis industry from seed to sale. The knowledge he has accrued over the years has helped him play a pivotal role in the establishment of industry standards and uniformity. In 2009, Bruce founded Rocky Mountain Medicinal Cannabis. His primary role there was to develop and manage the cultivation of cannabis and oversee the extraction and processing of oils from cannabis. He has also worked as an expert witness in legal cases, whereby his testimony helped set legal precedents in multiple states. His wealth of expertise in the cultivation and regulatory processes related to industrial hemp has led to consulting work for the agricultural departments of numerous states. He currently continues his work for some of these states as an advisor. Following the webinar today, we will have a Q&A session and would welcome any questions that you may have. If you experience any technical issues during the presentation, please contact us using the chat system. I will now hand over to Connor and Bruce.
Thank you, Jack. To all the attendees, I just want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining. You may have seen a few of our webinars previously where it was more of a formal presentation. Our goal here is just to have an open and clear discussion between Bruce and I around cannabis filtration in the oil manufacturing process. So you've seen on the screen for a while now what we'll be talking about. So let's jump in here. I know we did quite a lengthy introduction, but we'll just continue with that. Once again, my name is Connor Hutchison. I am a member of Powell Corporation, specifically our SLS, which is our Scientific and Laboratory Services Group. And one way of thinking about this is an internal consulting group ensuring customer success with the integration of our filter technologies. And that really is going to be the crux of this discussion today between Bruce and I. Really a partnership that was formed, solving specific problems that are observed in the manufacturing process. So Bruce, I'll hand it off to you.
Hello, my name is Bruce Vanneman, co-founder of Avelo International, vice president. I have been in the cannabis industry since 2004 and worked in the regulatory formats and advisory boards in multiple states, and have invented our own processing systems that are patented and all-in-one, closed loop, and GMP. This is what sets us apart on technology. And some of the issues that we ran into, we were glad to start working with Powell Corporation on our research side to tackle some of these problems that we had.
Awesome, thank you for that, Bruce. So why are we here today? As I mentioned, there's a couple key points that we want to address, specifically issues that I commonly observe within the cannabis industry. At this point, I've been on the phone and I've visited several hundred customers. And so from this, you're able to find and pull trends as to what are the common pitfalls or what are the traditional bottlenecks, and is there innovative ways of solving these. And so one thing is difficulties navigating various types of extractions. As we know, there's many large, at least in the United States, multi-state operators that are looking to standardize product offerings. That's one thing that we'll touch upon here, creative ways to ensure a common product, even at a state level, when you're working with things like an ethanol, a CO2, potentially a butane process, things like that. Various bottlenecks that are often observed in the manufacturing process, some which we didn't initially think we would be alleviating by implementing proper filtration technologies, but it was a great surprise for us, and it's been really interesting working with customers to implement this. And then I alluded to this earlier, but reproducibility under a GMP setting. So Bruce, anything you'd want to add?
Well, the one thing I really want to talk about is the consistent in batches and the use of safe and reliable products and the reproductivity of your product that you're trying to get to your customers. And right now that problem has not been really addressed in our industry, and having a clean product, clean of particulates, oils, or other pathogens and waxy materials. And us goes back to starting with proper genetics and using uniform batches to start with and pre-processing before you even get it to the processing center. And that is a problem with our industry, is that a lot of farmers or cultivators are still processing with using the entire plant, which drives, and don't know proper techniques for proper pre-processing to get it to us for consistent processing and batches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we've been able to find, and once again, as we first started exploring the cannabis market a little over 2.5 years ago, one thing that we didn't initially assume was the minor differences resulting from the genetic origin of the strain that we're working with and extracting, the nuances between how it would ultimately impact the filtration process, and how if you're not doing your diligence from a filtration standpoint, how that will impact downstream processing. It actually has more of an impact than we initially gave it credit for. And so it was fun for me trying to pull those trends, understand those minor differences, but then implement technologies that can standardize the product coming out of the filter for downstream processing. Even if I know certain customers from a CBD side, they've had things like dirt and sand. Certain strains have a higher wax content, which many of you know. And so being able to efficiently and consistently filter that out, such that the falling film evaporator, the rotary evaporator, and whatever distillation system you have implemented is seeing a common effluent. So great point there. A little bit more information about Paul Corporation. We are a global provider of filtration and separation sciences. So one thing, as once again, implementing innovative filtration technologies for specific processes. One thing that sets us apart and that we really are proud of is a deep customer applications knowledge. So one advantage that we offer with Paul is we don't only operate in the cannabis industry. We've been around for 70+ years. And with that, we've seen the maturation of several industries, one example being craft beer. And so working from when it was largely a garage operation all the way to having implemented these wonderful technologies that allow for consistent product quality in these settings. And so carrying that application knowledge, not just from the cannabis industry, having a global technical team where we can leverage their knowledge as well as we approach this industry. And so that's one thing that's been really valuable on my end. Once again, a worldwide reach. I've worked with many of my colleagues across the globe and worked with them to ensure that a transfer of knowledge was done well, such that they understand the cannabis process itself. So for any of you that are joining not from the United States, hopefully you can sleep well knowing that you'll be in good hands regardless of who you speak to here at Paul Corporation. And Bruce, I'll hand it off to you.
Hi, this is Bruce Vanneman again. This is our all-in-one scalable processing system. This combines multiple processes that we are able to synchronize and make completely closed loop and runs on a negative atmosphere. Now, this equipment is GMP compliant, offers a long service life. One person can run the machine all day long. This got the attention of the Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration because there's no chance of getting contaminants in once the product is in the system. The biggest problem that we were finding consistently is that the genetics and pre-processing led to different qualities of batches and final end product, and previous materials were still being left behind in the biomass. So with our system, we decided to go on a very long search for a better filtration system to make our downstream processing for solvent removal and for white film extractor and distillation on farther down the line, so we'd have a cleaner product before it even get to those pieces of equipment. Once we got that sorted out with Paul Corporation, that increased our productivity and efficiency a great deal, and the quality of the finished product going to the customer is second to none now.
Yeah, and Bruce, there's a couple interesting points, about this enclosed system. So one thing is I see, we highlight here the ultrasonic extraction, and if you want to speak towards why that was something that Avelo entertained. I know it's not too often that we see this type of technology. Any advantages relative to more traditional extraction systems?
Well, not just by giving your biomass a chemical wash of whatever solvent that you're using, but once you have your pre-processing complete and it's milled to a very fine material that's going into the machine, that gives it more surface area for the solvent one to come in contact with. But once we use our sonification or ultrasound that hits the biomass, it blasts the lipids out of the biomass, so you have a better oil retention in your solution, and it removes it from the biomass instead of having a lot of leftover cannabinoids left in your biomass. When you go to pump out the solution, you're finding out you have a higher density rate in that solution from using sonification.
Absolutely. And I know one other thing that we're seeing a lot of is most customers are using a cryo extraction process. Obviously, it has advantages from a manufacturing standpoint. Is that something that can be entertained with the system as well?
Yes, actually, right after our main, where we remove the oil, the lipids from the biomass, is that we send it off to our inline dewaxing system, and that is our cryogenic dewaxer right in line before the filtration. So we remove all the paraffins and parabens, waxy materials out of that product line before it gets to the filter, because all you're going to do if you try to run it through the filter ahead of time is it's going to plug up the filters with wax. And we found that having that dewaxing unit or cryogenics before the filtration made the service life and ease of use of the filtration system longer, easier to handle, maintain. So that means less consumables and increases your bottom line.
Yeah,
right there.
Awesome stuff there. Yeah, thank you, Bruce. So we're going to jump in here to the extraction process flow. Many of you on this call, you've seen this, you're masters of this, you do it on the daily basis, but I just want to normalize the playing field for anyone that may not be familiar with this. So obviously we're starting with some biomass. Typically it's milled to a specific size. It then goes through an extraction process. What we typically see here is a cryo process. So somewhere around -30 is the sweet spot that I've found. Coming out of that extraction is the crude oil. So these things, including any waxes, lipids, and then also chlorophyll. And of course, the chlorophyll, depending on the temperature and the residence time in the extraction process. But moving from that, really where we have played an integral role is the clarification in the removal of these particulates. As you guys know, these depth filters will not do so much in terms of chlorophyll. And what we've done is, after our typical sheet media, which is cellulose, diatomaceous earth, perlite, filter aids like that, immobilized in a cellulose matrix, we moved to a color removal process, which is using a similar technology as the clarification filter, but rather than filter aid being immobilized in a cellulose matrix, we've immobilized powdered activated carbon. So an enclosed, sanitary, easy to use system to accomplish that color removal, which we'll touch on in a few slides. After this, we then have the solvent recovery process, which yields the crude oil distillate, which then moves to the final molecular distillation process. And one thing that we want to mention, and what we'll be talking about at length, is the advantages that you will observe in your solvent recovery and your distillation step upon implementing an optimized filtration process. So specific that clarification and color removal. So Bruce, I'll hand it off and I'll let you talk through some of the trials and tribulations you had before you were working with Paul, where you're at now. So all you.
Okay, this is where a couple of slides we put in here of our before and afters. In our closed loop design system, it's designed to pull all the material through under a negative atmosphere. But what we were finding with previous filtration systems, that when we use our sonification, the particulates were too small to be captured by regular filtration systems. And we went through several systems through half a year and couldn't get any of them to work. As you can see in the one picture here, without the Paul filtration system, you can see the buildup of those particulates in my white film extractor at the bottom. Well, that ended up into the distillate oil when it went over to the short path side and for distillation, and you'd still have those particulates and other residual issues that would still show up because of the filtration was not adequate. And this was a common problem in our industry, whether you use sonification or not, as getting different genomes produce different particulates and lipids and fats and waxes at any given time. So uniformity of crop is the where you start at, but having a clean filtration system. And when we met up with Connor and his team, we started off with a truckload of filters and worked through them over a couple of months, and finally got it to where we could run the oil without leaving particulates in our equipment. And then on the picture on the right, that's after running for a week. And that's what's left over, was nothing inside of our equipment. So that made the operation of the actual processing equipment for recovery of your solvents and distillation run so much more efficient. But it presented a product at the end that the customer desired to see. He wanted to see nice, clear or light amber distillate oil. That's exactly what he got with no particulates in. And that's the difference between Paul Corporation filters and everybody else.
Thank you, Bruce. One thing that I think would be interesting for those who are, entertaining the option of starting an extraction facility, or maybe they're just now getting their feet wet and purchasing some of this equipment, could you speak towards what the process of cleaning this would look like, and the time it would take? And
well, when I figured out that there was a problem with the white film extractor not running to its potential, we literally disassembled it just to take it apart and look at the rollers and the inside of the cylinder and the coating of the pipes. And what we found was that it was the particulates, because that is a heated unit, would just stick to it. It wasn't passing it all the way through. And we were finding this throughout the whole system. And it took all day just to clean that one unit. So if you have to take a day down from your runtime, that's money out of your pocket. These machines are supposed to be running 24/7. And they shouldn't have to be shut down for maintenance too often, other than changing your consumables of solvents or your filters and stuff like that. And it should run all the time. But that was the problem we were having with consistency. And that's when we went back to finding a different filtration system to remove this before it ever got to the processing equipment. And it took a while with Connor and his group, but when we finally figured out a good enough platform to work, that's exactly what it took. And the experience with working with Paul and their filtration team made all the difference in the world. With other systems that we tried, large companies, but their utter lack of customer service. We would call with a technical question, they wouldn't call us back or email us back for 3-4 a week. You know, it was hard to get any information when you're trying to run a production line. Their utter lack of responsiveness, and quite often their technology just did not filter. It did not work. So then we have to go back and clean the equipment again. So that puts us down another couple of days. So that adds up after time to finding a system that actually works.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And one thing that was interesting from my end in working with you, Bruce, was when we had initially had, you know, our intro discussion, if you will, where we covered your process at length, and you had highlighted that there's an ultrasonic step in the process. And in a past lifetime, I was working for a winery, and I did a research project that was looking at, you know, sonication methods for oak extraction. And I remember in the wine itself, there's a lot of these fine particles, right? And so, you know, taking, once again, highlighting a process knowledge from parallel industries, right? That one thing was that relative to other customers that I'd worked with, I knew that this was going to be a little bit more tricky from a submicron or the fine particle range, if you will. And so it was really, some good back and forth. And one thing that I really appreciated about working with Avelo was your willingness and your openness to entertain finding the right solution. As you know, and what we worked through, it wasn't a one size fits all, and that's just not the reality with most filtration processes. It's really, you know, taking a data-driven approach and understanding what are the nuances that we need to focus on here to make sure that we have a fully functioning system. And so that's one thing that I really appreciated about working with you and the Avelo team.
that was both ways on that one. We went through a dozen filters before we finally settled on something. And if it wasn't for Connor and Paul Corporation, we'd still be working on it, and still wouldn't have an efficient running piece of equipment that would present a good finished product for the customer. But now that we've got that out, this could be an industry standard and highly recommended for whatever your processing systems that you use. But this type of filtration to make a cleaner product, eventually the FDA and USDA are going to make some rulings on this stuff about what is fit for human consumption. And, you know, the cleaner the product, the higher you can demand for that product.
Mm-hmm.
That affects your bottom line.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Bruce. And so, you know, talking through here, just working with Paul, one thing that we typically do on our end before we start really trying new technologies with customers is understanding what are their specific success criteria. And so once again, having an exploratory call, discussing the process that you're working with, and then from there, starting to implement technologies, taking that data, using it as feedback to drive our decisions moving forward. So Bruce, I'll hand it to you here, and I'll let you talk through what we're looking at.
Process optimization with GMP compliance was our key thing to having a cleaner product, and the process itself be GMP, good manufacturing processes. This is coming to our industry. When you have that certification, you can get higher prices for your product because it shows that your customers, one, that you're following those good practices, and that adds to your bottom line that you're a solid company. Now, producing a quality product that you can have uniform finished product sitting there for a customer, wow, that speaks a lot for you right there. Now, with Paul Corporation's filtration, we were able to remove the chlorophyll, any other waxy materials, all the fine submicron particulates, and then change the color and deodorize it before we were able to get it into the white film extractor. So all that material was scrubbed down without any loss of cannabinoids. So depending on your filtration system that you use, we're using Paul and we will continue to do so. After we have tested before and after filtration, we found no loss of cannabinoids. So you can filter this very well and to a very clear solution before it goes into your equipment. And that will make a finer finished product for you wherever you go.
Yeah, it was an interesting point. It was one of the golden questions that we were being asked in the cannabis market as we were, working with more and more customers. The question kept coming up: what's going to be the cannabinoid loss? Will it change my cannabinoid profile? It was a bit challenging initially for us to get that data to really understand it. Early on in the industry, a lot of our customers didn't want to share their potency values. They didn't want to share the analytics. But one thing that we realized is that they wouldn't share their information, but they kept buying the filters, right? And so we had a hunch that we were onto something. And then over time, working with universities and various customers that were willing to share that information. And one thing that's really interesting that we found, and it makes sense when you really step back and think about it, but the more you're removing before it gets to solvent recovery, the higher potency values you're going to have. And so in certain cases, we've seen customers with a 5 to 7% jump on average in potency, even before going to a distillation process, which I think was really interesting when we started to realize more of the pronounced impacts it would have, on the potency values itself. And then one thing we would come across pretty often was, different ways that people were approaching color removal and using acidified carbon or these bleached clays, which if you're working with now, I'm sure you've realized they can be a bit of a pain. But running the potency values or the cannabinoid profile analytics after it's gone through those acidified or bleached clays and just seeing that the cannabinoid profile was actually changing, have it be an isomerization or a degradation of a major cannabinoid into a minor, these interesting things really started to play a role. And once again, it's something that we just weren't seeing with our customers, which we were, happy and proud to say as we continued to work with the market.
Well, we got test results from multiple labs when we sent out multiple samples just to test that very theory with the same lot and batch that we were testing when we were testing the filters there, Connor. So the data confirms that from independent sources that had no idea what we were sending them. We just wanted their test results, and it confirmed the same thing. We didn't have any degradation in concentration because of filtration whatsoever. It actually went up. The dirtier material that you had going in that was lower quality, when it got filtered, it going into your processing equipment actually drove the concentration up.
Oh, beautiful. I'm happy to hear it. So chugging along here, Bruce and I, we got together and we talked about certain things that we wanted to share through this discussion. And one thing that we landed on were just general best practices. And a lot of these on the surface will seem obvious, but it's just things that we have found relevant as we've been working together and within the market. And so one thing that I'm really passionate about, and I alluded to this earlier, was formalizing production parameters, utilizing analytics. And specifically what I mean by that is building out and having a formal QA process as you approach the cannabis manufacturing. And so what I see with a lot of customers is a hyper focus of HPLC analytics, which is great, but something that I look forward to, because I'm seeing it more and more, is understanding what parameters ultimately impact those potency values, specifically things like particle distribution, things like turbidity, so the NTU for those of you who may come from a brewery or a wine background. And so building out a more robust quality program, and earlier I had used the example of what we've seen within the craft beer. So taking something that would be done in a garage, moving it to a large scale manufacturing process, but maintaining the consistency and quality. And this is something that I'm passionate about as we see more and more consolidation with multi-state operations wanting a consistent product, and just an over-reliance of HPLC data. And so really try to deep dive the parameters that drive the ultimate analytics that you'll see. Bruce, if you want to talk a little bit about the organic certifications and the COAs.
Yes, this is where over the years I've been, testing biomass as we have gone through this process. But a lot of things we are seeing is this uniformity in genetics to set up the processing equipment. Because if you have one farmer that brings you one set of genetics, it may not run through your machine as what you had in there previously. So uniformity of your biomass that you're running through your equipment, and sticking with organic COAs, and that's what's really going to be big thing. But pre-processing, what we're seeing a lot of people doing is testing their buds and getting really high numbers, and then they go to process their material and they're chopping up the stems and stalks and not bucking their material or taking the flower off and milling it. They're chopping the whole plant up, and then that's adding filler to your biomass, and it takes more to extract, and that's going to drive your concentration down and be harder on the equipment when you're adding more to it instead of the actual product you want to extract. So that is, pre-processing is a key thing, having uniform genetics and testing your whatever you're bringing it into your processing center. Even it has a COA, take a sample of it and have it tested, because they don't always match. And then you'll have a better idea of what's going into your machine. If you have junk going in, you're going to have junk coming out. And makes it very simple if you really do understand that. And going with cheaper equipment or cheaper filtration systems to think that you're filtering does not make it better. It does not. If you buy a good quality system that is consistent and you can maintain yourself, that makes the difference on the bottom line and how you operate and your profitability. That's really, really a key thing here. Cheaper does not always mean better, but the most expensive piece of equipment out there too, I've seen absolutely not perform at all. So getting the quality company with the research and the development team behind you to get your filtration solutions handled. This is why we made Paul a partner of ours as a research and development of this technology.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bruce. I appreciate those words. One other thing, and I think it's an important question, is if someone asked you to 10x your process in a month, 2 months, let's say, would you be able to accomplish that? And looking at the process as a whole, would there be one point of failure if you were asked to do that, or would there be several? Now, you may not be 10x in your process anytime soon, but everybody always has a growth target. Make sure that you're using a technology that can be scaled And the other thing is that try to work with a technology where that upscale process is as frictionless as it can be. So working with companies that have experience, working with large scale manufacturing operations, and having technologies that can easily scale with you. Awesome. One thing that we want to highlight, your partner in the cannabis industry. So hopefully through this call, you guys have heard several advantages that we can offer. One just being customer support. I love getting on the phone with customers, understanding the specific process at hand, and then working to implement a solution that is right for you. And then supplying a consistent quality, just making sure that batches will be as consistent as they can be. And so with that, I want to say thank you. I really appreciate all of your time. Thank you so much. Bruce, it was a pleasure. One thing, if you're interested in learning a bit more, we're currently offering a 30-minute consultation. You can follow the link here. Let's get on the phone and let's chat. So Bruce, with that, I'll let you close this out.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate everything that Paul Corporation and Connor and his team from the beginning. We could send them videos and pictures and they would have a solution for us, and the next day in the mail we'd get a different filter. The customer support and the engineering that goes behind it, and their drive to make sure that you have the best product available. This is why I use Paul Corporation. This is a long-term partnership that we're going to be developing.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Connor and Bruce. I'm sure everybody on the webinar will agree that there were lots of fantastic points raised throughout the presentation. And if it's okay with you both, we'll jump in as we have had a couple of quick questions that we'd like to go through. The first question that I've got for you here is looking back to slide 8. What is the black material that we're seeing there?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get back to it, just we're on the same playing field. Yeah, Bruce, I'll let you take this one.
That is the carbonization of submicron particulate matter that did not get captured by the filtration system that we were using in your wipe film extractors or whatever you're using as a solvent recovery. They're either jacketed and heated so it can move the viscous oil through there. And we were seeing is that particular matter was building up in our equipment and causing it to run slower and put out a poor product at the end. And that's exactly what that is.
Yeah, actually, I was with a customer last week, and we saw that this same exact thing. And it turns out they were using some third-party housings, and they weren't getting actually a proper seal on the filters. And so, path of least resistance, they weren't actually filtering. And so they saw a gross buildup of this in their solvent recovery system, and it just created a nightmare. They actually were making isolate, so it was not an ideal situation to have all of that particulate. And what actually ended up happening is the crude that they were generating from the solvent recovery, for whatever reason, all of this particulate offloaded into it, and it was just it looked like tar. It was just a nightmare. So
yeah, and you can't really clean it again until you run it back into solvent to make it thin enough to run back through a filter medium at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And start that process over. So that takes away from your bottom line for time and resources that you're expending just to redo it all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Moving straight on to the next question. I believe this one is addressing slide 8 too. Can biomass impact level of filtration needed? If sand and or dirt are present in the biomass, do you need to use finer filtration?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've beat that one over the head quite a few times in the presentation. So yes, absolutely. and that's one thing where it's not you know, a one size fits all. There definitely is a right filter for your process. And so once again, that's a lot of my role, is just working with customers, understanding the nuance of the process. Avelo as an example being the ultrasonic method that they were implementing, resulting in submicron particles, thus finer filtration was needed. And so just working with someone that has that expertise and can offer the insight for a more nuanced process. So absolutely.
Awesome. On to the next question. Now we're looking at slide 9, I believe. Somebody has asked, why not just use bag filters?
Lots of reasons.
Yeah, they're very ineffective. And so one point that's often misunderstood about filtration is that there's no governance in terms of micron rating of a filter and its efficiency. And what I mean by that is on filtration, which is very tight, but they still are seeing products or problems with their you know, distillation process or just product quality as a whole. And often it turns out that they're using a 1 micron bag filter. And the point that I'm getting at is that a 1 micron bag filter is much less efficient relative to, well, let me step back here. If you were to challenge a 1 micron bag filter with 100 particles, measure upstream particles being 100, whatever would come out downstream, and then do that with a similar filter offered with Paul, that's one way of understanding the efficiency of that specific rating. So in summary, it leads to an inefficient filtration process. And one important question to ask as you are sourcing filtration suppliers is, you know, what is the efficiency of removal at that specific micron rating? And you know, using that data to understand not every filter is equal when it comes to an efficiency standpoint.
That is a fact. This is where I would send pictures after I make a couple of runs to Connor and his team. And then we'd have a different gradient of filter right there, swap it out, make the next run, take pictures of it, send it to the guys. And, you know, it wasn't a one size fit all, but we finally got it down to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. And then just one final question again, I believe based on the discussion in slide 9. Do you see the same efficiency if you don't use carbon?
No. It will be good. Ideally, though, it is a two-step approach. And Bruce, you can speak to this more than I can, but the carbon really just does a good job of scrubbing that extract before it goes to downstream. But I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, this is what the carbon, it really removes all the chlorophyll, and that will build up in your system too after time. If you have heated or jacketed parts of your vessels, or even if they're cold, you know, that chlorophyll will build up. But if you remove it and deodorize it with the carbon filters, it's just cleaner material before it goes down to downstream processing, and it makes the world of difference in longevity of your equipment, ease of operation, and a cleaner product overall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essential for any type of cannabis oil extraction. If you can use the carbon filtration, that makes a huge difference.
Anything to add on that, Connor?
No, I think Bruce got every angle. I couldn't agree more. So
awesome. Well, in that case, that is all the time we have for questions today. I just wanted to let everybody know that following the webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey regarding your extraction and filtration processes, as well as the challenges you face with dewaxing. And we would really appreciate it if you could respond. It's just 5 simple, quick questions, and it will really help our speakers better understand your needs and the challenges you face. And again, just a reminder for everybody, any questions that we didn't have time to get to in the Q&A today will be passed on to Connor, Bruce and the team so they can get back to you. And also you can continue to ask questions even when watching this webinar on demand. If you have any friends or colleagues that you think may be interested in this talk or any of our future talks, please do feel free to share the link with them. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much, Connor and Bruce. It's great to have you today, and we really do appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate that.